Well, after the two-wheeled action from the 600 Super Sports at Mallala, we're heading now just south of Goulburn, back to Wakefield Park and the Group Q race. John Cummins, some very interesting equipment out there.
There certainly is, and these are probably the most sophisticated cars that race in historic racing, being the newest vehicles, Greg.
Well, 1973 being the latest model, the 74s and 75s, they're all racing together. This is Richard Carter on screen with the #1 plate. Well, that's always a coveted number. Right in behind him, Bruce Kennedy there, the red machine. And as the race progresses, Carter's already off the circuit. Cold tyres possibly, John?
I think it could be cold tyres. Kennedy coming up the inside of him there, and Dr. Michael Henderson, the seatbelt man, sitting in behind him in third spot.
Well, for these guys, I suppose this circuit really is a challenge. When it comes to setting up the machines, there's an enormous amount of work because of the enormous amount of adjustability in the cars. When you consider the changes that you can make when you've got wings front and rear, all of a sudden a new area of maybe the unknown creeps in.
Certainly, and stabiliser bar settings, shock settings, not like the old cart spring vintage cars where you just get out and drive and change 2 pounds in the tyres. This is a whole science racing these cars, which are virtually very similar to current racing cars.
I was just having a look there at Bruce Kennedy on screen now, and the car's a little bit unbalanced. If you look at it, he seems to have the front end pushing. It's understeering through the corners. Again, you've just got to try and get some temperature up. Now you can see there that as Carter comes onto the track behind him, Carter really does have a strong line now. Horsepower will come into play. Carter out of slipstream, thank you very much, and blast back into the lead. Well, he'll try not to make that same error. You know, John, one of the interesting parts about this class is that it's, well, open slather for all of the Formula cars. Essentially, they're Formula 2 cars, and they're 1600cc's, 5-speed Hewland transaxles. We've got a Formula Ford in there.
We certainly have, because they were built in the same period, and the old Formula Fords are running with this group of cars, and not very much slower as it may seem. Greg, I was very surprised, particularly here at Wakefield, where the accent is on handling rather than out top speed.
Yes, and most of them running a fairly flat wing. In other words, they don't really want to hurt themselves too much top speed wise. But the Formula 2 cars in fact still have an Australian Championship. So we're seeing cars here that essentially could run in the Australian Championship with the AF2s, but in fact running as historics.
Quite correct. And it's not really the circuit for Formula 2 cars. It's not what this circuit was really built for, but they're still putting up a very good show.
I know one thing's for sure, that with these guys, they are very much the purists. They tend to think in engineering terms. Here's our Formula Ford out there, and you can see the huge difference between Formula Ford and Formula 2. Now, it doesn't matter whether we're talking back in the mid-70s, a la these cars, or whether we're talking the mid-90s. Formula Ford has changed very little. The fact of the matter is they're a 1600cc pushrod Ford engine with no aerodynamic devices on a control tyre. They all run a similar tyre, and they're very limited in their modifications. The interesting point being, of course, is that Formula Ford is raced the world over. Well, we've got a bit of a battle going here. Farrell up the inside of Kennedy, and I think he's been playing that one for a little while, just thinking about what he's going to do. Flying Tigers painted on the side of the car. John, I'm not quite sure what Flying Tigers means. Maybe it's low cats or something.
Yeah, well, of course, the later model cars did have sponsorship, so the cars to run in historics, if they have got a sponsorship, it's got to be the sponsorship that the cars had in the period. So they can't have two different sponsors from two different eras. It's got to be a sponsorship that matched the car.
Well, Carter out in front. Oh, have a look at that. Unbelievable. Now, that's power-induced understeer. You don't quite often see that, as Farrell came onto the straight, opened the throttle, and the front end went away. Now, that's pretty well unusual, but in a Formula car, depending on how you've got the thing set up as to how it behaves on the track, some of the cars are running slicks, but the majority of them are still running a treaded type tyre.
That's true, and probably the hardest thing that these blokes have got to come to grips with is finding suitable tyres for these cars, because they're in very short supply, and sometimes they've just got to take what's available rather than the tyre that they really choose to run on.
Well, Dunlop continue, don't they, to produce tyres for older model vehicles. They seem to have found a bit of a niche market when it comes to historic racing. There are in fact historic cars being raced the world over, and there is a need for the tyres, and Dunlop seem to be keen to produce tyres to suit these vehicles.
We have got the American company now coming into it, Hoosier, which started out as Speedway tyres, are now manufacturing the very earlier style Dunlop treaded tyres, and one of their experts has just left Australia and very impressed with historic racing, and they're going to make a lot more tyres, and probably at a better price too, Greg, which will certainly suit everybody.
No doubt about that. One of the most well, expensive parts about racing is the consumables, be it brake pads, especially tyres. Well, Carter on his final lap, and after that little indiscretion early on in the race, I think he settled into it. And fortunately, it's not wet on the circuit. We've had sort of changing conditions all day. Pretty difficult to sort of pick what you're going to do out there, but this car just looks so strong out there. And you can see that it's well balanced. It doesn't slide in the front or it doesn't slide in the rear. If it does, they all go together and somewhat makes it controllable. Carter, though, finding the circuit pretty difficult to set the vehicle up for. There's so many different types of corners. You've got fast, slow, and you've got corners where, in fact, you come in at high speed. Through these S's here, for example, right where he was there, many of the cars getting themselves into problems looking for that apex. Well, he's heading down the back straight. He's headed for a right-hander that will bring him onto the front straight and to the checkered flag. That corner there seems to catch a lot of competitors out. And, you know, he hasn't really gone that far ahead of our man Chris Farrell here in second place. Carter, though, heads for the line, gets the checkered flag. Farrell crosses the line in second place. And I think the crowd, well, enjoying mid-70s Formula car racing here at Wakefield.